Hello and welcome to Bald Spot Math. Today we're going to be talking about comparing decimals and comparing decimals to fractions and also putting these in the correct order when we have more than a couple numbers. So let's get started. It's really very basic and you're going to use the same techniques you learned how to compare and order whole numbers, except now we have a decimal and numbers to the right of the decimal to think about when we're doing this. But it's really a two-step process here. And what you've got to do is first, place the numbers vertically. That means stacked one on top of another so the place values are lined up. It's very important. The whole key to this is line up your place values, line up your decimal point. And then you're going to start as far as left as possible comparing numbers. So let's look at an example. Alright, there's my rules again. And now we're going to compare the numbers 32 and 479 thousandths to 32 and 482 thousandths. And again, it's important to know your place value. You really should know your place value by now. If not, spend a few minutes learning it. Alright, so first I'm going to put those numbers on top of each other vertically, and I'm going to start on the far left comparing the numbers. And what I've got here is I notice this first place, both the 3's are the same. That doesn't help me. In the 1's place, the 2's are the same. That doesn't help me. And I keep going until I finally notice in the 100th place, there is a difference between the 7 and the 8. The 7 is smaller, therefore this number has to be smaller. So when I write this out, I can say that 32 and 479 thousandths is smaller than 32 and 482 thousandths. And of course, this is a very simple example, but that's how we learn. We look at the simple and we move on to more complex. And let's move on now to when we have more than just a couple numbers. All right, so what if we want to order more than a couple numbers? And we've got a set of 4 numbers here again, not a lot, enough to show the point. 32 and 482 thousandths, 32 and 479 thousandths, 33 and 43 hundredths, 32 and 435 thousandths. So let's take a look, see what we can find out. We're going to use the same process. You'll notice that all these 3's are the same. When we go to the 1's place, we have 1 3 and 2 2's. Automatically, we know now that that has to be the largest number. So I'm going to just stick this down here at the bottom, assuming I'm numbering least to greatest. If I was going to greatest to least, of course, that would be the first. All right, so I can get rid of that one. These are all the same. All 4's. Oops. All 4's. Now I've got a 3, a 7, and an 8. All right, the 3 is the smallest in that place, and I'm going to put a number here. Now, one of the things that I didn't do earlier that is a good idea to do is to place right here where there was this hole, a placeholder 0. So it's a good idea to do that to keep your place values lined up. All right, I've got that's taken care of. My 7 is smaller than my 8. Okay, so my next smallest number is 32 and 479 thousandths, and then 32 and 482 thousandths is left. Now, what happens when we introduce fractions into this? Let's take a look. So now we've got a mixture of decimals and fractions, and there's a few ways to do this. First of all, we have 3/4, 276 thousandths, 5/12, and 63 hundredths. Okay, there's 3 ways to do this. Perhaps there's more, but right now we're going to talk about 3 ways. First, you can use your number sense, but you want to be careful. Unless you have a really good, firm grasp about what these things, their values are, or their estimated values, you might want to stay away from that. If you do, if you've got a really strong number sense, or you can easily convert some of these things on your own without doing too many calculations, without using a calculator, you're good to go. All right? Converting all numbers to fractions. Relatively simple to do, the conversion part, but not so easy to then put them in order, and I'll show you that in a minute. Convert all numbers to decimals. In my opinion, this is the easiest to do because then it's the easiest to make your comparison. And of course, especially if you're using a calculator, it's a piece of cake. All right, so let's take a look at completing this problem. First, we're going to compare, and we're going to turn all our fractions into decimals. I'm just going to do a really quick calculator here. But of course, you should know that this is nothing more than a division problem. That 3/4 is the same as saying 3 divided by 4. If you don't know how to long divide, you need to go ahead and take a look at a couple of videos, ask your teacher on how to do that. But I'm just going to plug that in my calculator, and of course I know that that is going to be 75 hundredths. So my decimal value for 3/4 is 75 hundredths. And I'm going to do the same for 5/12. 5 divided by 12 should be, oop, hit the wrong number there. I added 5. It's a little blurry up here. Hopefully I can do that again. And I did. Let's try third time's a charm. Okay. 5 divided by 12. We get a pretty big decimal here. Sometimes, especially when you're doing for comparing and ordering, it's okay to round these because what you're really trying to do is just get them in the right order. All right, and my others were, of course, already decimals. So then I'm going to put them in order. Now, it's important when you go back to put these in order, don't use the decimal values for this because those weren't the original numbers. You want to use this information to help you do the comparison and the ordering, but when you make your list, you'll notice I've got 5/12 and 3/4 back in there. Use the original numbers. Okay? You'll see, especially with the calculator, that does not take very long. Now, of course, you want to stack them again and take a look at all your place values. Let's look at doing it with fractions, which is going to be a little more complicated. We're going to use the same numbers. Now, turning decimals to fractions is not complicated. Okay? That's not the difficult part, because what's nice about decimals is you say it, you can turn it immediately into a fraction. What is this number? It's 276 thousandths. 276, I like to say, is the first name. That is your numerator. And thousandths is your denominator. Now, at this point, I would not simplify it just yet. And I'll show you why in a minute. Same thing with this, 63 hundredths. So 63 is its first name or its numerator. Hundredths, last name or denominator. Now this is why this method is not quite as simple. Because now, as you know, in order to compare fractions, unless you use your number sense, you want to get all of these fractions with a common denominator. And that is not always an easy, simple thing to do. So, once you find a common denominator, a least common denominator, and you can do this by finding the least common multiple, or you can just multiply all of these together, you're going to get a really big number, you're good to go. Alright? But once you do that, and that's not the purpose of this video, to show you how to find a common denominator, you can then put them back into the original order using the original numbers. I don't necessarily recommend this method. You can see how it is more complicated, especially as you get into more and more numbers, but turning fractions into decimals and then comparing and ordering those, much easier. That's it for today.